My goodness, there are a lot of weird doctrines that are floating around regarding a red heifer. And, one thing that I read that someone had said was that the red heifer is going to be sacrificed, and therefore this means Armageddon is going to start. Armageddon doesn't happen until after the wedding supper of the Lamb. It doesn't happen until after the resurrection, the bowls of wrath, the fall of Babylon, then the wedding supper of the Lamb, then Jesus comes back with his Holy One, and that's when the Battle of Armageddon happens. What are people talking about? They just make up their own stories. I believe that years ago when I was listening to Jonathan Cahn, that he had a lot of emphasis on the red heifer being sacrificed as though there's some sort of prophecy with regard to a red heifer. Red heifer is mentioned one time in the Bible in Numbers 19. And what the red heifer was used for was to purify those who had been around a dead body in order for them to be able to enter into Passover. That's it, guys. That's it. There's no prophecy about a red heifer. And so people are talking about this solar eclipse, about counterfeit Passover in Israel. I say counterfeit because we already know that they've messed with this calendar. They're not observing the correct Passover or the correct calendar. They prostituted themselves to the Romans and their Gregorian calendar. God didn't give permission to do that. Why would God prostitute himself to the Romans? Let's read about this red heifer. Numbers 19. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is a requirement of the law that the Lord has commanded. Tell the Israelites to bring you a red heifer, without defect or blemish, that has never been under a yoke. Give it to Eleazar the priest. It is to be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Then Eleazar the priest is to take some of its blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tent of the meeting. While he watches, the heifer is to be burned, its hide, flesh, blood, and intestines. The priest is to take some cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool and throw them onto the burning heifer. After that, the priest must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. He may then come into the camp, but he will be ceremonially unclean till evening. The man who burns it must also wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he too will be unclean till evening." Okay, what happens in evening? Well, a new day. So he's unclean the rest of the day. "A man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and put them in a ceremonially clean place outside the camp. They are to be kept by the Israelite community for use in the water of cleansing. It is for purification from sin. The man who gathers up the ashes of the heifer must also wash his clothes, and he too will be unclean till evening. This will be a lasting ordinance for the Israelites and the foreigners residing among them. Whoever touches a human corpse will be unclean for 7 days. They must purify themselves with the water." So this water from the ashes of the heifer on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, then they will be clean. But if they do not purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th days, they will not be clean. If they fail to purify themselves after touching a human corpse, they defile the Lord's tabernacle. They must be cut off from Israel. Because the water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on them, they are unclean. Their uncleanness remains on them. This is the law that applies when a person dies in a tent. Anyone who enters the tent and anyone who is in it will be unclean for 7 days, and every open container without a lid fastened on it will be unclean. Anyone in the open who touches someone who has been killed with a sword, or someone who has died a natural death, or anyone who touches a human bone or a grave will be unclean for 7 days. For the unclean person, put some ashes from the burned purification offering into a jar and pour fresh water over them. Then a man who is ceremonially clean is to take some hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle the tent and all the furnishings and the people who were there. He must also sprinkle anyone who has touched a human bone or a grave, or anyone who has been killed, or anyone who has died a natural death. The man who is clean is to sprinkle those who are unclean on the 3rd and 7th days, and on the 7th day he is to purify them. Those who are being cleansed must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and that evening they will be clean. But if those who are unclean do not purify themselves, they must be cut off from the community because they have defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. The water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on them, and they are unclean. This is a lasting ordinance for them. The man who sprinkles the water of the cleansing must also wash his clothes, and anyone who touches the water of cleansing will be unclean till evening. Anything that an unclean person touches becomes unclean, and anyone who touches it becomes unclean till evening. So you see in Numbers 19 that he's talking about how a person is to be cleansed from having been around a dead body. Now let's go to Numbers 9. The Lord spoke to Moses in the desert of Sinai in the first month, the second year after they came out of Egypt. He said, have the Israelites celebrate the Passover at the appointed time, celebrated at the appointed time at twilight on the 14th day of this month, in accordance with all its rules and regulations. So Moses told the Israelites to celebrate the Passover, and they did so in the desert of Sinai at twilight on the 14th of the first month. The Israelites did everything just as the Lord commanded Moses. But some of them could not celebrate the Passover on that day because they were ceremonially unclean on account of a dead body. Well, whatever shall they do? We already read about how to be cleansed of being around a dead body. So they said to Moses and Aaron, we become unclean because of a dead body, but why should we be kept from presenting the Lord's offering with the other Israelites at the appointed time? Moses answered them, wait until I find out what the Lord commands concerning you. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites, when any of you or your descendants are unclean because of a dead body or are away on a journey, they are still to celebrate the Lord's Passover, but they are to do it on the 14th day of the second month at twilight. Okay, first Passover is on the first month. Second Passover is at the second month with the same exact regulations. Second month at twilight. They are to eat the lamb together with the unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They must not leave any of it till morning or break any of its bones. These are all the same regulations as the first Passover. When they celebrate the Passover, they must follow all the regulations. But if anyone who is ceremonially clean and not on a journey fails to celebrate the Passover, they must be cut off from their people for not presenting the Lord's offering at the appointed time. They will bear the consequences of their sin. A foreigner residing among you is also to celebrate the Lord's Passover in accordance with its rules and regulations. You must have the same regulations for both the foreigner and the native born. Okay, so the points I'm making first is that the red heifer, the ashes of the red heifer were used for cleansing in order to mix with clean water, and they were used in order to cleanse a person from having been around a dead body. In order to enter into Passover, you had to be clean. You had to have sacrificed a red heifer and been sprinkled with that clean water with the ashes of the red heifer, or you weren't allowed to enter into Passover. That's what the red heifer signifies, guys. There's no prophecy regarding a red heifer. And one of the things that I saw someone write today is that the last red heifer was sacrificed before Jesus came, and therefore what? Now if an ethnic group in Israel sacrifices a red heifer, it's going to usher in Jesus? Give me a break. There's nothing that we're going to do to make God do things on our timeline. He's going to still do them on his timeline. The one thing that we can do is learn the lesson. Return to him, do these things. But to think that we're going to somehow manipulate God into coming, first of all, and second of all, that us trying to manipulate God into coming is going to be a good thing for us at all, is just ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. And by the way, where does it say in the word that the last red heifer was sacrificed before Jesus came? Sacrifices didn't just suddenly discontinue after Jesus died. It wasn't until the second temple was destroyed that sacrifices then were discontinued. And it was destroyed a while after Jesus died. He prophesied that it would be destroyed to his apostles, but we weren't told when. And I don't see it written about in the word. But it definitely doesn't say in the word that the last red heifer was sacrificed before Jesus came. Jews have continued to do certain practices even after Jesus died. So I would imagine that they had continued to sacrifice red heifers in order to enter into Passover, even though you can't enter into Passover if you don't have Christ. But that they had continued in these cleansing rituals for a while after Jesus died, while the second temple was still here. These are additions to the scroll. I mean, people, it's so weird how they would rather believe in a story that they made up rather than the story that God gives us, that's actually true, that's actually going to happen. Counterfeit Christianity has an obsession with an ethnic group in the Middle East because they don't know the Word of God. They do not understand what the fulfillment of these things are. And so they're getting swept up in every delusion and lie and all the ways that wickedness deceives those who are perishing. That's what the word says. They think that there's a temple that's going to be rebuilt. They think that this war between Israel and Hamas and Palestine, that this is actually, they spin the narrative to say, oh, well, actually, it's a holy war with holy motives, because really what they want to do is they want to build the third temple. These are irreligious people. They're playing you. They don't know the word. They don't live based on the word. They're doing things that are against the word. We don't inhabit the land until after the resurrection. I mean, does anyone know the word? That the Antichrist, why in the world would God give you the land and then send the Antichrist after you? That doesn't make sense. When he gives us the land, when we inhabit the land, it's going to be forever. No one's going to take it from us. And we are the land. We are the kingdom. We are the house, the temple, Jerusalem, Zion, Israel. All of these concepts have been established as symbolism to help us to understand who we are before God, who we've been created to be. So what you are seeing in these various narratives are the very people that Jesus is going to say, or to whom Jesus is going to say, depart from me, evildoers, I never knew you. And all of these people will think that they are in him. They will think that he is coming back for them. Please read your Bibles, guys. Red heifer mentioned one time in the word. One time. I don't know what this obsession with the red heifer is, but it is not coming from the word. It's coming from delusion. Please discern this message with God.